So when Simon asked me to speak, I said, yeah, of course. And then I said, what's it about? He said, deal making. So I've just agreed to do something without actually knowing what I'm talking about. It goes to show how strong my deal making skills are. Then I thought to myself, Jesus, what is it I know about deal making? I have rates on my website, and my rates are out there, and everybody knows what I charge. And I travel all over the world teaching people to love themselves and love their faces. I don't make deals, not regularly, and I certainly don't ask Coca-Cola, and I don't ask anybody for money in that sort of scale. And kind of funny you should mention the Irish American Fund. It actually put me through college.
Right.
I went to New England College of Finance in Boston through NCI. And that kind of brings me into what I talk about a lot. And it's the art of inclusion, or condition of inclusion, where when you do for the good of the village, everybody benefits. And when I talk about deal making, or when I thought about deal making, I said, what is deal making and what does deal making mean to me? And for me, what I do is I mix human behavioral sciences. I mix things like sociology, neurology, psychology, and I bring them all together to teach people about self-acceptance, about image wellness, and to understand the difference between what technology and the society give to us and what we take from that, and the understanding that we take from the changes in the world around us. And when I thought about deal making, I thought, well, where does deal making start? You know, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've come from. So I thought about where deal making originated from. And everybody knows about barters and how barter trade happened and where that all kind of came from. And when I really, really thought about it, I thought back to when did we come onto this earth? When, as humans or bipods, did we arrive? And that was about, that's not the fire alarm, is it? That's John's shut up alarm. So when I looked at it and I thought about when we actually stood on this earth in a recognizable form like this, it was 5 million years ago. And 5 million years is a long time. And it was 5 million years of inclusion where everybody had abundance, everybody had everything. Everybody had everything they needed and only took what they needed. We had fruit, we had vegetables, we had pretty much everything that this earth can grow. And it didn't belong to anybody, it belonged to everybody. And we took what we wanted and what we needed, but only what we needed. And that's 5 million years. And about 12,000 years ago, something different happened. It was the agricultural revolution. And all of a sudden, we were saying, no, these are my carrots, they're your cows. We give the Irish the potatoes. Don't tell them about the plight thing, that will come later. But what we did is we separated everything. And we segregated the world and said, this belongs to me and that belongs to you. Can you imagine after 5 million years of development and evolution, when all of a sudden, everything has to stop? We're going to change the mindset of everybody and say, no, you can't do this and you can't have that. So instead of the whole world owning everything, all of a sudden, everything was belonged to the village. We look after ourselves and I look after me and we look after the village. When you do for the good of the village, everybody benefits, and we still see that sort of mentality and mindset in some indigenous tribes around the world, where they take care of the village. The fishermen fish, the hunters hunt, the women stay back in the village and they nurture the kids, they cook the food, and they help each other to grow. Everybody does for the good of the village so that everybody benefits. And then, all of a sudden, about 5,000 years ago, we had invasions, plundering, pillaging, gentrification, where people took and took and took and said, that's no longer yours, it's ours, it's mine. And you're going to pay me a tax for the privilege of having those goats, and you're going to pay me a tax for the privilege of having those carrots. So all of a sudden, 10% of people were living off the efforts of 90% of people. And that's another massive shock to the system. That's another massive shock to the psyche of the human development. Human psychoevolution has taken all these massive twists and turns. So you can imagine where the mentality of those people 5,000 years ago were. And that continued on. And it still happens today. There's a lot of unfairness in the world. In 1960, the word individualism was coined for the very first time. That'll tell you how small people's villages are getting. We're closing the doors to the rest of the village because it doesn't matter what the rest of the village want, as long as I get what I want. Individualism gave rise to narcissism. This sense of, I want everything and I want it now. If you look back, Scrooge characters were classically the villains. All the way back. They were always the villains. This, I want it and I want it for me. I don't want it for anybody else, I want it for me. They were always the villains. And now we look at the world that we have where people are going around and essentially it comes down to we need water, we need air, we need food, and we need sex. We need to continue on our genetic line. And how do we do that? We continue on our genetic line by being the best partner. You know, what we're putting out there into the world is that I'm the biggest, I'm the strongest, and I'm the most successful, and I can give you strong genetic offspring. And with that strong genetic offspring, they can continue to have strong genetic offspring. So, we look at our village, and unfortunately for a lot of people now, our village is one person. You're like the fella standing behind on the moon. You might have all the money in the world and all the nice things in the world, but if you've nobody to share it with, what sort of a deal are you making with yourself? One of the most prolific deals that we can make with ourselves happens in here. Because we need to understand, to do for the good of the village, we have to have a village first. We have to have somebody else to take care of and somebody to take care of us. You know, individualism is fine, and understanding your own self-worth is fine, but you need to understand that your self-worth, it's directly connected to the value that you give to the village and that the village gives back to you. A friend of mine told me years ago, and I always remembered it, that he worked in a pub in Enfield, and Enfield's not the biggest of towns. And when you worked in a pub in Ireland, you usually work split shifts. You come in the morning, you work until the afternoon, you leave for a few hours, and then you come back in and you work until the pub closes. And it being Ireland, you don't generally go home for those few hours. You head to the next pub and you have a few pints. And Ollie said that he left the pub with the owner of the pub. They went up to the next pub in the town, and your man was tight. The owner of the other pub was tight. He'd peel an orange in his pocket so he wouldn't have to share it. That's how tight he was. And this fella, they went into the pub and they sat at the bar and they ordered a couple of drinks. And your man gave them the points, and they were there for 3 hours. And in the 3 hours that they were at the bar, he counted to till 4 times. Now we're not talking a pub in the middle of Temple Bar here, we're talking a small pub in the middle of Enfield. And he counted to till 4 times in 3 hours. And the owner of the pub that Ollie worked in turned around to himself and he said, you see you, Oliver Flynn, if you look after your customers, the tills will look after themselves. And it's something that always stayed with him. Ollie left that pub, he grew up a bit, he worked in the Shelbourne, he moved off from the Shelbourne and he bought a small shop in Mount Marion. Tiny little shop. And he always remembered, if you look after your customers, the tills look after themselves. When you do for the good of the village, everybody benefits. So he looked after his staff and he looked after the customers. He even went so far as to open up for 2 hours every single Christmas day because he knew that you always forget the bread, you always forget the milk, the tea bags, the batteries for the kids' toys. There's always something on Christmas morning that you forget. He paid one of his staff every single Christmas to go in there for 2 hours. He'd probably take €20 in. He knew he'd only take €20 in. And he paid that poor chap €200 for that day. Knowing that if he did for the good of the village, that shop would benefit and he would benefit. He turned that shop into a supermarket. He sold the shop and he moved to Cork. He bought the Bullman in Kinsale, and on the very first year he didn't win anything. He was finding his feet. The second year he won the very best pub in Munster with Black and White Awards. Third, fourth and fifth year that he had that pub, he won the best pub in the whole of Ireland. He did for the good of the village so that everybody benefited. He looked after his customers and his staff because he knew it would come back to him in spades. Take care of everybody and they'll take care of you. That's a deal worth making. The trade-off is worth making. He left that pub and he moved back to Dublin to get the property. He didn't really have any customers, he had nobody he could look after, and he moved back at the wrong time. And long story short, he ended up losing pretty much everything. But because he looked after the village and everybody looked after him, he ended up running the Angler's Rest in Chapel Elizabeth. He'd been running that pub for nearly 10 years and he's taken it from doing £5 a week to almost €160,000 a week. Because he does for the good of the village so everybody benefits. When I started taking photographs, I was terrified. absolutely petrified to take photographs of people, because every time I pointed a camera in somebody's face, they told me they hated their face. I look fat, I look old, I hate myself. And I felt that was my responsibility and my fault, because I didn't really understand it. In 2014, I got to train with the top headshot photographer in the world, Peter Hurley, because I built a reputation. I built contracts and I built trust. I was taking care of my customers so that the village took care of me. In 2014, when I did train with Peter, I also trained with a corporate psychologist named Rowley. And I went back to study again. And I learned a lot about the neurology, the psychology, the endocrinology, and how everything that happens inside of us is worn on our faces. Because if I take care of the village, they take care of me. If I take care of my customers, it comes back in spades to look after me. Now I travel the world. I work with multinationals, I work with LinkedIn, Google, Facebook. I work with Bank of Ireland Private Banking. I spend my time standing 5 feet in front of the clients that I photograph. And I teach them whatever happens on the inside and how that manifests on the outside, because I have no interest in what their face looks like. There's beauty in every single face I've ever photographed. Every face is different. Yours is different than mine, and mine is different than yours. There's 7.4 billion people in this world. Because of narcissism, because of individualism, and because our world has closed in to make smaller deals, more difficult deals, and deals that we make with ourselves, that we don't realise we're making with ourselves a lot of the time, what we've done is we've closed our world in really tight. We're part of a village. 7.4 billion people in it. Every single one of them are different, internally and externally. The deals that we make are so important to everybody else in that village. Our village is millions and millions of years old. But sometimes we forget. If we want to make bigger deals, we need to make better deals in personally. We need to look within ourselves, and we need to look at how those deals reflect on the rest of the village. Those deals are intrinsically linked, and our self-worth is intrinsically linked to those around us. The value that we add to them and the value that they add to us, and how they come together. If we want to make better, more sustainable deals, you just need to look around you. When you do for the good of the village, everybody benefits.